Hello and welcome. Whether you're here to get scared with spine-tingling stories, or to relax and drift off to sleep with my voice over the soothing sound of rain, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more of this in the future. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I first heard the tapping just after midnight. The storm had been going strong for hours, wind howling through the alleyway behind my apartment. Rain hammered against the windows, a steady white noise that should have been comforting. But this sound, this was different. Tap, tap, tap. I paused the movie I was watching, straining to hear over the storm. It was probably just the rain hitting the glass in an odd rhythm. Nothing unusual. Tap, tap, tap. It was too deliberate, too precise. A shiver ran down my spine. Slowly, I turned toward the window. My apartment was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, just a sheer drop into the alley below. And yet, the sound continued. I told myself not to look, just ignore it. But some part of me, the part that always had to check, always had to know, pushed me forward. I crossed the room, my fingers trembling as I reached for the curtain. With one swift motion, I pulled it aside. A face stared back at me. I sucked in a breath so sharply that my chest ached. He was right there, inches away, separated only by a thin pane of glass. The man was deathly pale, his skin almost translucent in the dim glow of the streetlights. His hair was plastered to his forehead, water dripping down in slow rivulets. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his bony frame. But his eyes were the worst part. Wide, hollow, fixed directly on mine. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. My phone, I needed my phone. I scrambled for it, nearly knocking it off the coffee table in my panic. My fingers shook as I unlocked it, ready to dial 911. I looked back up. He was gone. The window was empty, rain running down the glass in winding trails. I stood frozen, my phone screen glowing in the darkness. My pulse pounded in my ears. What the hell did I just see? I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it. Maybe the storm had played tricks on my eyes, the way headlights sometimes make shadows move. Yeah, that had to be it. Still, I checked the lock on the window 3 times before going to bed. I woke up at 3 a mass to the sound of tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I shot upright in bed, my breath catching in my throat. It was coming from the window again. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's just the rain. It's just the rain. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't want to look. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay under the covers, to pretend I hadn't heard it. But then I heard something worse. A soft creak. My stomach dropped. That sound hadn't come from the window. It had come from inside the room. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head toward my closet. The door was open, just an inch. I stared at the darkness between the door and the frame, my entire body locked in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The wind howled outside, rain hammering the glass. My ears strained for any sound, any sign of movement. The silence pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. Then, a whisper, low, ragged, right by my ear. Let me in. The closet door creaked open a little wider. I bolted. I don't remember grabbing my keys. Don't remember unlocking the door. I was just suddenly in the hallway, sprinting down the stairs, barefoot, my heart about to explode. I spent the rest of the night in my car, engine running, doors locked. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to go back. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. The window was still shut, still locked. But the closet door, it was wide open, and the floor beneath it was wet. I've been a night shift bus driver for over 15 years. You see all kinds of people when you drive after midnight. Drunks, lost souls, tired workers heading home. But what happened on that rainy night still haunts me. It started like any other shift. The rain had been falling since sundown, soft at first, then heavy. The kind of rain that made the roads slick and the air thick with mist. My wipers scraped across the windshield, barely keeping up with the downpour. The bus was nearly empty. Just one old man sitting in the back, staring out the window, his breath fogging up the glass. I followed my usual route, stopping at empty stations, the headlights cutting through the rain. The streets were quiet. Only the occasional car passed by, their red taillights glowing like distant eyes. Then, at a stop near the edge of town, I saw him. A lone figure stood under the dim streetlight, hood up, shoulders hunched against the rain. He didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there, waiting. I pulled over, the brakes hissing in the cold air. The doors swung open. He stepped in. The first thing I noticed was how soaked he was. Rain dripped from his clothes, pooling on the floor. His hood was pulled low over his face, but I caught a glimpse of his pale skin, his sharp jawline. He smelled like wet earth, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. "Cold night," I said, forcing a polite smile. He didn't reply, just nodded and moved to sit near the middle of the bus. I shut the doors and pulled away, glancing at him in the mirror. He sat stiffly, his hands resting on his knees. He never took his hood off. Something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was how quiet he was. Most people at least muttered a "thank you" or sighed as they sat down. He made no sound, no movement. The old man in the back shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. He just kept staring out the window, his face blank, eyes lost in the rain. I could see the reflection of his tired eyes in the glass, following the passing streetlights in silence. But nothing strange happened. The bus rumbled along the wet road. The wipers droned on. The old man got off a few stops later, leaving just me and the hooded passenger. I focused on the drive, trying to shake the odd feeling. The passenger never moved, never reached for his phone, never checked a watch. He just sat there staring out the window. 15 minutes later, he finally stirred. "Next stop," he said. His voice was low, hoarse. I nodded. "Got it." A few minutes later, I slowed near an empty stretch of road. No houses, no stores, just trees and the sound of rain. The doors hissed open. He stood up and stepped off the bus without a word. Then, he was gone. I didn't see him walk away. 1 second, he was stepping into the rain. The next, the road was empty. I stared into the darkness, my heart hammering. The doors shut. The bus groaned as I pulled away, my hands clammy on the wheel. But I didn't think much of it. Not for 6 months. 6 months later. It was a slow afternoon. I had just finished my shift and stopped by a small diner for coffee. The place had a rack of old newspapers stacked in the corner, free for anyone to read. I grabbed one randomly, just looking for something to skim while I sipped my drink. Then my eyes locked on a headline. "Unsolved tragedy. Man killed in bus accident. Still unidentified. 20 years later." I felt a chill creep up my spine. My breath hitched as I looked at the grainy black and white photo beneath the headline. It was him. The same sharp jawline, the same hollow eyes. According to the article, a man had died on that exact stretch of road one rainy night 20 years ago. He had been the only passenger when the accident happened. The driver lost control in the storm and crashed. No ID, no family, no name. Just an unclaimed body and a mystery that never got solved. My fingers tightened around the paper. The date of the accident? The same night I had picked him up. I felt sick. My coffee sat untouched as I sat frozen in my seat. I drove that road every night, and 6 months ago I picked up a passenger who never left. The storm had been loud all night. At first, it was just the wind, whistling through the trees, making the house creak. But then the rain came, heavy, relentless, hammering against the windows like desperate hands trying to get in. Every few minutes, thunder growled in the distance, inching closer each time. I sat curled up on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on my phone. The glow of the screen was comforting, a small bubble of light in the dim living room. The TV was on, volume low, just background noise to keep my mind from focusing on the storm. Then, without warning, everything went dark. The TV shut off. The soft hum of the fridge disappeared. The heater died, leaving only the sound of the storm raging outside. For a moment, I just sat there, my phone's screen the only source of light. Just a power outage. It happens sometimes during storms, no big deal. I tapped my phone. 2% battery. I groaned. Just my luck. The wind screamed through the trees, rattling the windows hard enough that I half expected them to shatter. I needed light. Sliding off the couch, I moved carefully through the darkness, my hands outstretched as I felt my way toward the kitchen. My heartbeat was steady, but my body felt tense, my nerves tight like a stretched wire. The drawers rattled as I searched. My fingers brushed against something smooth and round. A candle. I let out a shaky breath. Good. The matchbox was next to it. I struck one, the tiny flame sputtering to life before I lit the candle's wick. Warm, flickering light filled the kitchen. The shadows shifted and stretched, dancing along the walls. It should have been comforting, but somehow, it wasn't. I felt watched. The house was still, the kind of stillness that didn't feel empty. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the dark, the storm, and the sudden quiet were playing tricks on me. Then I heard it. Breathing. Soft. Slow. Not mine. I froze. My own breath caught in my throat, my ears straining to listen. The candle flickered. The sound was faint, almost masked by the storm. But it was there. Inside the house. My pulse quickened. I turned my head slightly, trying to pinpoint the source. The living room. The doorway yawned open before me, pitch black beyond the candlelight. The shadows there were deeper, thicker. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to breathe. My grip on the candle was tight, my knuckles white. Maybe it was the wind, maybe... The breathing got closer. A slow inhale, a long, shaky exhale, like someone standing right behind me. My hands trembled. I wanted to turn around, but part of me was too afraid. Then, a footstep. Not mine, a soft creak in the dark. The air in the room felt heavier, like something unseen had filled the space around me. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, of something waiting. I ran. My feet barely touched the floor as I sprinted toward my bedroom. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, heart hammering. Silence. For a moment, all I could hear was the wind and rain outside. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. Slowly, I set the candle down on the nightstand, my shaking hands barely steady enough to keep the flame from going out. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe. Breathing. Right next to me. My whole body locked up. The room felt too small, too still. The candle flickered wildly, then went out. Darkness swallowed me. The breathing didn't stop. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body tensed. My ears strained for any sound, but the only thing I could hear was that slow, deliberate breathing. Then, a loud click. Light. The room flooded with warmth as the power returned. The heater hummed. The fridge rumbled back to life. The overhead light glowed, chasing away every shadow. The breathing stopped. I exhaled, my body still shaking. The room was empty. I didn't move. I didn't turn off a single light. I sat on my bed, wide-eyed, watching the door, the walls, the corners of the room. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Not until daylight seeped through the curtains. The cabin wasn't supposed to be there. I had been driving for hours, trying to outrun the storm. My GPS had lost signal miles ago, and my phone was nearly dead. The rain made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, the trees lining the narrow road stretching into twisted shadows. Then, through the sheets of rain, I saw it. An old cabin tucked between the trees. It looked abandoned. The roof sagged, the wooden walls dark with rot. No lights, no signs of life. But the storm was getting worse, and I was too exhausted to keep driving. I pulled onto the muddy path and parked. The door was unlocked. The air inside was thick, damp, carrying the scent of wood and something rotten beneath it. Dust covered the furniture, untouched for years. No signs of recent life, and yet something felt wrong. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the eerie silence pressing in around me was nothing more than the isolation of an abandoned house. I set my bag down and took a deep breath. I'd stay for a few hours, just enough to rest. Then I'd be gone by sunrise. Then I heard it, a whisper, low, faint. Somewhere inside the house. I froze. The wind, I told myself, the house settling. Anything but what it sounded like. Still, my pulse quickened. I turned in slow, careful steps, scanning the darkened corners. The whisper had stopped. I was alone. At least that's what I told myself. I shook off the unease and made my way to the couch using my jacket as a pillow. The rain outside was steady, rhythmic, lulling me into something like sleep. Then, in the middle of the night, the whispering returned. This time, it was closer. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. My phone slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The whispering had stopped again, but something felt different, like the air in the room had changed. I reached for my phone, using the flashlight to scan the room. My pulse hammered as the beam cut through the darkness. At first, everything looked the same. The dust, the broken furniture. Then I saw it. Footprints. Wet footprints. A trail leading from the doorway to the couch where I was sitting. I stopped breathing. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard anything but the whispers. And yet, someone had been standing right beside me. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, stumbling into the rain. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, throwing myself inside and locking the doors. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I forced myself to look up at the cabin one last time. The front door was still shut. The windows were still dark, but inside, behind the glass, something was moving. A shape, just barely visible, shifting in the shadows. I didn't stay to find out what it was. I drove straight through the storm, not stopping until the sky turned gray with morning. When I finally worked up the courage to check my phone, I saw the last picture I had taken, the one I snapped of the storm before I lost signal. There, in the distance, barely visible through the rain, was the cabin, waiting. Like it had always been there, like it would always be there, like it was waiting for me to come back. The shadow in the storm. First-person paranormal horror. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by the storm. I tightened my grip on the wheel, trying to focus on the road through the relentless rain. My wipers fought against the downpour, barely making a difference. The sky was black. The world was empty. I was the only car for miles. Then I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road. My headlights caught them for only a second. A tall, unmoving silhouette, motionless in the storm. I barely had time to react before I passed them, my stomach twisting with unease. Something about them wasn't right. They weren't standing near a driveway or a car. Just there, in the middle of nowhere. I exhaled sharply, shaking off the creeping unease. Probably just some hitchhiker. I kept driving. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The storm raged on, the rain drowning the world in white noise. Then, through the downpour, my headlights illuminated something ahead. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same figure. Standing on the side of the road, I felt my hands tighten on the wheel. That wasn't possible. I hadn't turned. There were no side roads, no shortcuts, but there they were, tall, still, watching. A cold dread settled in my chest. My mind raced for an explanation. Maybe I had imagined passing them the first time. Maybe it was a coincidence. I drove faster. The rain pounded harder. The storm swallowed everything around me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned my head, and my stomach dropped. The figure wasn't on the side of the road anymore. It was running, straight toward my car. I slammed the gas. My tires skidded against the slick pavement as my heart thundered in my chest. The car surged forward, the engine roaring against the storm. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it any closer. But then I heard it. A soft, wet breathing. From the back seat. A sharp, ice-cold dread spread through my chest. I couldn't move. I could feel it. Someone was sitting behind me. The air in the car grew heavy, damp. I could hear the faint drip, drip, drip of water pooling on the seat. A voice, low and hollow, whispered from just inches behind my ear. "You should have picked me up." The headlights of another car flashed in my mirror, just for a second, and in that second I saw it. A figure, soaking wet, hollow-eyed, sitting in my back seat, grinning. I swerved, my tires screeched, the car veering wildly across the road. When I looked again, the back seat was empty, but the seat was still wet, and the door was unlocked. I didn't stop, I didn't pull over, I just drove. I don't know how long I kept going, but by the time I reached the next gas station, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely remove the keys from the ignition. I stepped out into the dim glow of the streetlights, the rain now nothing more than a light drizzle. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. That's when I noticed it. The muddy footprints leading away from my car, heading back toward the road, waiting for someone else to come along. My sister has often been drawn to unconventional men, a pattern that has kept me quietly watchful. This time, she introduced us to her new boyfriend, Zane, during a relaxed family dinner. He greeted everyone with a courteous smile and a calm, measured tone. There was an air of mystery about him that left me both curious and thoughtful. His manners were impeccable, and his conversation was gentle yet reserved. The evening passed smoothly, leaving me with subtle questions instead of clear answers. During the dinner, Zane maintained a polite reserve and contributed only when he felt it appropriate. He listened intently, occasionally interjecting with observations that seemed well considered. I noted the way his eyes wandered at times, sometimes connecting briefly before drifting away. It felt as if he was carefully absorbing every detail of our conversation. My sister appeared completely at ease, smiling as if she had found someone truly special. I, however, found myself quietly cataloging every little nuance in his behavior. It wasn't an outright alarm, merely a sense of curiosity mixed with cautious attention. The night concluded without incident, yet my thoughts lingered long after. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, I found a quiet moment alone with my thoughts. In the soft glow of the hallway light, I remembered the small details of Zane's demeanor. There was an intensity in his gaze at times that made me pause and reflect. I wasn't quick to judge, simply noting these moments as curious observations. Every movement, every pause, had a deliberate calm that intrigued me. I resolved to keep an observant eye in the coming days, just to be sure. The evening's impressions left me with a mild, persistent intrigue. I went to bed wondering if I might uncover something more over time. In the days that followed, my curiosity led me to quietly search for more about Zane online. I started with a basic lookup, expecting to find a trail of social media posts or professional details. To my surprise, his digital footprint was nearly non-existent, nothing that could easily be found. It was as if he had carefully maintained a private space, free of public records. This lack of information made me wonder if he was simply a private person. Yet, I couldn't help but feel that the absence of details was, in itself, a clue. The mystery surrounding his background deepened with every search I conducted. I decided to proceed slowly, gathering facts without leaping to conclusions. Not long after, I came across a single news article from about 5 years ago that piqued my interest. The article was brief and noted an unresolved case involving a missing person with few details. Within its lines, there was mention of a man whose description seemed carefully noted without naming him. I read through the article several times, comparing each detail to the subtle hints I had observed. A small, grainy image accompanied the story, leaving much to interpretation. I felt a chill as I considered the possibility that the description might align in unexpected ways. Though the connection wasn't immediately clear, the implications were enough to slow me down. I closed the article with the mind swirling with unanswered questions. As I delved further into the details of that old report, I noticed descriptions that resonated with what I'd observed. There was a mention of a specific jacket that in a way seemed familiar. I carefully reviewed the words, not rushing into any judgment but weighing every fact. The parallels, though subtle, were enough to spark a more cautious curiosity in me. Every detail, every color, every line felt like a piece of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. I felt a mixture of disbelief and intrigue as I compared the past to the present. While it was too early to be certain, the similarities lingered in my thoughts. I resolved to collect more information before coming to any conclusions. Over the next few days, I found myself caught between concern and the need for further proof. I revisited the article repeatedly, each time uncovering layers of subtle hints. The evidence was not overt, but every small detail contributed to an increasingly complex picture. I struggled with whether to share these findings with my sister or keep them to myself for now. The responsibility of protecting her weighed on me, balanced by my desire for clarity. I carefully documented every nuance, intent on not letting emotions cloud my judgment. Each new discovery only deepened the mystery, urging me to be more observant. I decided that caution and patience were the best allies in this uncertain situation. Tonight, I stand in a quiet hallway as soft voices echo from the living room. My sister is there, engaged in conversation with Zane, both of them wrapped in easy familiarity. I pause, taking a slow, measured breath as I consider all that I've learned so far. Every detail I've gathered forms a quiet warning, yet I remain determined to be sure. I remind myself that no single piece of evidence should prompt hasty conclusions. There is a delicate balance between safeguarding her and uncovering the truth. In this still moment, uncertainty and resolve intermingle within me. I decide to continue observing and collecting facts before making any decisive move. Now, as I stand at the threshold of the living room, my heart beats steadily in the hush of the night. I can sense the weight of the unknown lingering in every quiet corner of this home. My thoughts race with possibilities, each one as tentative as it is concerning. I consider the evidence, however subtle, and wonder what more might reveal itself. The calm facade in the room contrasts with the storm of questions in my mind. Every decision from here on out must be made with care and measured intent. I know that whatever the next step is, it will be taken only after more careful thought. For now, I remain a silent observer, waiting for the right moment to act. The day after Thanksgiving, I pulled into the parking lot of the massive Benjamin Library in Memphis. 4 stories tall, an enormous building of glass and brick, its towering windows reflecting the pale gray sky. Yet, the parking lot was completely empty, not a single car in sight. For a brief moment, I hesitated, wondering if the library was even open. Balancing a takeout bag on the passenger seat, I glanced at the entrance. No movement. No sign of security guards, patrons, or even staff. Just the silent, looming structure standing against the dreary November afternoon. I had just picked up some food, so I decided to stay put and eat before checking it out. As I unwrapped my meal, I noticed a kid and an older woman approach the entrance. Without hesitation, they slipped inside, the heavy glass doors parting just enough to let them through before falling shut again. So, it is open, I thought. After finishing my food, I brushed the crumbs from my lap and stepped out into the cold air. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant chimney smoke. I walked up to the entrance and pushed the door. It gave way easily, slightly ajar as if expecting me. Inside, silence. Not the usual quiet murmur of a library, the subtle rustling of pages, the hushed whispers between readers. No, this was true, absolute silence. No voices, no footsteps, nothing but the distant hum of the air conditioning. It felt wrong. Still, I assumed the place was just understaffed because of the holiday weekend. That would explain the empty parking lot, right? Maybe they had reduced hours, minimal staff. Shrugging off the unease, I made my way upstairs, found a comfortable chair, and settled in with a book. Time passed. 2 hours, maybe more. I was absorbed in my reading, but something in the back of my mind kept nudging at me. The silence wasn't normal. I looked up, scanning the vast room. No one. Not a single librarian, no patrons, no one at the front desk. Just the endless rows of bookshelves stretching into the dim recesses of the library. A creeping unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stood up, slowly, and started wandering. Every aisle I turned down was empty. Every desk unattended. The children's section, the research area, even the break room behind a slightly open door, empty. I peeked behind counters, leaned into staff-only areas, even called out once or twice. My voice barely carried in the vast, hushed space. 30 minutes of searching. Nothing. Yet, the library had been open. The doors weren't locked. That kid and the older woman had gone inside. Where were they? A cold, prickling sensation crawled up my spine as I made my way back downstairs. The cavernous lobby stretched before me, its glossy tiled floor gleaming under artificial light. And that's when I saw her. A security guard. She stood near the entrance, arms crossed, staring at me with an unreadable expression. I hesitated, then walked toward her. "Hey, is the library open?" She tilted her head slightly. "The library's closed." I blinked. Wait, what? The door was open. I just walked right in. She didn't react, just stared at me with that same blank expression. Then, after a long pause, she let out a slow, drawn-out, unimpressed, "Huh, okay," like she didn't believe me. I frowned. But I saw people come in earlier, a woman and a kid. Did they leave? She didn't answer, didn't blink. I swallowed. "How long have you been standing there?" Silence. Something about the way she watched me sent a wave of unease through my gut. I felt unwelcome, like I had stepped into a place I wasn't supposed to be. I hesitated for another second, then turned and pushed through the door. The cold air hit me like a slap. I walked briskly to my car, the hairs on my arms standing on end. As I climbed inside and shut the door, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The parking lot was still empty. And the security guard. She was no longer standing at the entrance. In 1999, I was installing one of my children's museum exhibits in Staten Island, and they put me up on the campus, which had been an old U.S. Navy retirement village. Compound, called Sailor's Snug Harbor, if I recall. Every day for 2 weeks, I took the ferry over from Manhattan, staring at the Twin Towers and thinking, maybe I'll visit this weekend if I finish in time. Anyway, I was given the use of a retired admiral rank house, a standalone brick Georgian, circa 1835. The large campus had several civic buildings for the residents, the library, a grand hall, parade grounds, and of course a large hospital and graveyard. After all, this was the final port of call for our men in blue. During my stay, an independent film crew needed several exterior shots, a carriage arriving and leaving, actors getting in and out, walking towards my house, etc., so they had rented it for the day. My museum day was just as long as a film crew day, 12 to 18 hours. So as I was leaving in the early morning, the PAs were just coming in to set up the location. I'm a movie props maker, but had to stick to my own lane. When I got home that night, the film crew was gone. In and out just like they promised, and I was $100 richer, despite it not being my house at all. The location manager was visibly relieved at the low price, so I told them that I was a local 16IA guy from the West Coast. And since our days matched, and I wasn't expecting any compensation during my stay, I was happy. I'm sure people try to angle for a higher location fee when they hear who the actors are going to be. A recent 007 Bond villain. The company PAs left a small amount of production détruits, a partially full trash bag, and a bunch of those short little water bottles that hold maybe 2 big swallows, sitting here and there all around the house, with barely half a swallow taken out, the discarded twist cap sitting nearby, and a bunch of big summertime houseflies. The crew or actors might have had food inside. In any case, the front door would have been propped open most of the day. I got the impression they had been recording dialogue in the house. Read a line, take a sip of water, read more lines, ask for another bottle, sort of thing. Tired as I was, the noisome noise of 2 or 3 B-52-sized flies in the bedroom was keeping me awake. They seemed to be drinking from the open bottles when I turned on the lights, so I got up and put the lids on the 4 or 5 that had been left in the bedroom. Then I opened the window facing the streetlight and turned off the bedroom lights. A few minutes later, I shut the window and went to bed in silence, only to be awakened sometime in the middle of the night by the sounds of the washing machine going through a cycle down in the basement. You know, fill, agitate, stop, empty, spin, rinse, fill, repeat, etc. I went down in the morning to see what the deal was. Ancient basement. It had a finished floor, but barely. Dangling bare bulbs, psycho-style, and 2 ordinary-looking laundry machines, a washer and dryer hooked up with modern fittings. I opened the lid, and to my amazement, the washer drum was full to the top with that sand and glacier gravel just like you find all over New York State when you pop a shovel in the ground. I went back upstairs to get ready for work and saw one big dead housefly floating on its back inside one of the bottles I sealed. It felt creepy. When my daughter was 3 months old, we had just moved into a new house. It was a quiet neighborhood, nothing creepy about it, just a fresh start for our little family. Everything felt new, unfamiliar, but we were excited to settle in. The house itself had charm, with its creaky wooden floors and tall windows that let in plenty of light. At night, it was peaceful, almost too quiet. But within the first week, something happened that I still can't explain. One night, I was downstairs cleaning up while my husband was asleep. Our daughter was in her crib, and I had the baby monitor next to me. It was one of those video monitors with night vision, so I could see her tiny form resting peacefully. Her little chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, the sound of her soft breaths occasionally coming through the static. The house was silent, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then, through the crackling sound of the monitor, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft whisper. At first, I thought it was just interference, maybe picking up a neighbor's frequency. I adjusted the volume, straining to make sense of the noise. Then, clear as day, I heard a woman's voice. "Shh, go back to sleep, baby." The words were unmistakable, soft yet deliberate, spoken as if someone was right there in the room with her. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. I felt frozen, unable to move, afraid of what I might see next. I ran upstairs, flung open the door, and found the room exactly as I had left it. My daughter slept soundly, undisturbed. The rocking chair in the corner was still, unmoving. I checked the closet, under the crib, nothing. My hands trembled as I reached for the monitor again, glancing back at the screen. The room was empty. The air, however, felt different. Thicker, heavier, charged with something unseen. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence before finally backing out of the room and shutting the door behind me. For the next few weeks, small things kept happening. I'd hear faint humming through the monitor when I knew the house was silent. At times, a toy would be moved ever so slightly, as if tiny hands had nudged it in the night. Once, I walked in to find the rocking chair moving, just slightly, like someone had just gotten up from it. The temperature in the nursery always felt colder than the rest of the house, no matter how high we set the heat. The unease grew, gnawing at me whenever I stepped into that room. I started sleeping with the monitor's volume lower, afraid of what I might hear if I left it turned up too loud. Eventually, things settled down. I never heard the voice again, and the strange occurrences became less frequent until, one day, they stopped altogether. But even now, when I check on my daughter at night, I swear I can still feel someone else in the room, watching over her. It's not a menacing presence, not something that fills me with dread. Instead, it feels protective, like someone is there, unseen, making sure she's safe. And though I try to convince myself it was just my imagination, deep down, I know better. Some things simply can't be explained. I'm not exactly sure what I saw out there, but whatever it was, it decided to let me go, and for that, I'm beyond grateful. I'm the type who loves exploring the woods, especially at night. Sometimes, if I can't sleep, I'll head out to build survival shelters or just take in the quiet of the night. I live in a small town in southern Minnesota, surrounded by clusters of woods and prairie patches. Our biggest forest area is about a 30-minute drive out and covers nearly 1,000 acres, but last night I stayed closer to home. For a bit of context, I'm 6 feet 2 inches, part Native American, and usually love the thrill of being out in nature alone. Whether that's a dark forest, open prairie, or an empty part of town, So trust me when I say I'm not easily spooked. Anyway, last night I couldn't get to sleep. Probably because I was excited about a date I have lined up. So I decided to take a walk in the nearby nature park just to burn off some energy. Like always, I took my phone, a few tools, and my BB gun with me, just in case I ran into any animals or suspicious people. As I was making my way down the trail, everything felt off. It was eerily silent. I could hear only the wind in the trees, the soft sprinkle of rain, and the crunch of my own footsteps. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'm used to silence out there sometimes, but then I started to feel like something was watching me. That's when I thought, maybe I'm walking into a predator's territory. And I slowed down a little, trying to listen. A couple of faint bird calls from a distance broke the silence, which was a small comfort. I kept moving toward my hidden campsite, taking it slower than usual, scanning the woods with every step. Then, off to my left, I noticed movement, something big. My instincts kicked in immediately, and I reached for one of my knives, gripping my backpack tightly in my other hand. Usually, if you don't bother things in the woods, they'll leave you alone. So, I kept my pace, cautiously moving forward. Another 40 yards or so, and I finally got a decent look. Whatever it was taller than me, and I was standing on ground that was at least 10 feet higher than it. Its eyes met mine, and I felt an intense wave of unease. This wasn't a chance encounter, it was watching me, sizing me up, and there was a strange understanding that I was not welcome. The woods were dead silent except for my footsteps and the occasional snap of branches underfoot. But then, from somewhere close by, I heard this deep, rhythmic thud, thud, thud coming from the right. My gut told me I had to go, and fast. I dropped my knife and pack to lighten the load and started backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on the creature. I made it to the edge of the prairie, and that's when I turned to walk away. About 10 seconds later, I heard a loud, bone-chilling call, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It sounded almost like a warning. I turned, and there they were, 3 of them, standing together, all looking at me. It was like they were making sure I knew I'd crossed a line. I kept backing up until I was close to my dirt bike, climbed on, and got out of there as fast as I could. My heart was still pounding as I sped down the path, leaving the forest behind. Only later did I realize just how close I might have come to real danger. I'd only noticed 2 of them at first, and it was clear they were skilled at staying hidden until they wanted to be seen. Looking back, I'm grateful they decided to let me go, because it felt like a close call. They could have surrounded me before I'd even realized it. So, if you're planning to head out on Halloween night for a little thrill in the woods, keep your eyes open and trust your instincts. You never know who or what might be watching from the shadows. It was a rainy Saturday night. I was out in a restaurant with some friends having a great time. It was almost midnight and we had to leave. We came out, said our goodbyes, and I walked towards my car. I got in and started driving towards my home. I had a long day and was really tired. It was about an hour's drive to my house. On my way, I started to feel sleepy, so I turned on the radio to keep me awake. But there was some problem with the radio. All I could hear was static. I was checking the radio when suddenly I saw someone standing straight ahead in the middle of the road. I severed left and applied the brakes hard. The car screeched to a stop. I got out of the car to check, but there was no one there. I looked around where I saw the person standing, but there was no one to be seen around. No person, no tire marks, no indication that anything happened. I thought that my mind was playing tricks on me. I was just really sleepy. I went back to my car, checked the car. Everything seemed to be working except the radio. I was a little shaky after that incident and went on to drive slowly towards my home. I reached home at 1 a.m. Just as I got in, my phone rang. It was Andy, one of the friends with whom I was having dinner earlier tonight. He sounded worried, and he said that he was calling to check that I reached home safely or not. I told him that I was okay and asked what the matter was. He sounded confused and scared. He told that while driving home on the way, he saw a guy who looked just like me standing there in the middle of the road. He thought that he had hit me with his car, but when he went out to see, there was no one there. That was very weird. I said that even I experienced the same thing. He said that he had called the other two friends too, and even they saw something similar. He started to panic. I told him not to think about it too much right now and just go to bed. We'll figure this out tomorrow. After the call, I took a nice hot shower and then went to bed. Next morning, the four of us had decided to meet at the same restaurant and discuss the events of last night. I reached there early, only to see that the restaurant had been burned down to the ground. The entire place had just been completely destroyed by the fire. There were paramedics and firemen checking for any survivors and trying to get the dead bodies out. I saw an onlooker standing at the side or the road and went up to him to ask what had happened there. He told that there was a fire last night, a big one. No one survived. All the people were trapped inside the building. No one could call the fire department as all the phone lines were destroyed. The fire engines and the paramedics came in the morning when everyone was already dead. I felt that was very strange, as we had just had dinner there last night. I went towards the road to wait for my friends. As I was going, I saw one of the paramedics taking a dead body out. It was charred, but somehow the face looked familiar. I looked closer, and then I remembered where I had seen him. I was talking to him a couple minutes ago. I turned back to see, but he was gone. I started freaking out, thinking that, did I really see a ghost? The paramedic placed the dead body next to another one. Coincidentally, it also looked familiar. To my surprise, this was the person who I'd seen last night, the one I thought that I almost hit with my car. But from his wounds, it looked like he had died there in the fire too. My head was starting to spin. What was going on? It was as if suddenly I was seeing ghosts everywhere. By this time, my friend Andy reached there too and was shocked to see the place burned down. "How is that even possible?" he said. "We were almost the last ones out of here, and the owner said that they had to close the place." "Yeah, I know. It is all very weird. This place burning down and me suddenly seeing ghosts everywhere." "What ghosts?" Andy asked. I told him about the dead bodies lying there and how I had seen the same guy last night and then today morning too. "That is strange," Andy said. "I did not see any ghost, but I remember seeing you last night in front of my car." Just as he spoke those words, I saw the paramedics carry out 4 more bodies: Andy, me, and our 2 other friends. All 4 were burned. I looked at Andy, then at my burned and lifeless body, being carried away right in front of my eyes,